Welcome back to another episode of After the Peaks, the podcast that explores the journeys and impact of entrepreneurs, change makers, and everyday people who are making an impact in the world today. I'm your host, Brian Quigley, and today we have a truly extraordinary guest joining us. Please give a warm welcome to our esteemed guest, Matt Cochran, a renowned dream scout and wilderness guide with over 3 decades of experience guiding and facilitating, helping individuals navigate the vast landscape of dreams and the wilderness to uncover the transformative potential they hold. But beyond Matt's otherworldly achievements, we'll also delve into the personal side of Matt in the ordinary world, embracing the sustainable lifestyle. We'll discover the motivation that drives him, the sacrifice he's made, and the defining moments that have shaped his character. This episode promises to be a source of resilience, self-sufficiency, and empowerment, daring you all to dream. I'm truly honored to have Matt join us on After the Peaks. So without further ado, let's drop into the episode. Matt, thanks for joining us. I have so much I want to talk with you about. And I'm going to start off with a quote. The mass of men lead lives of quiet desperation and go to the grave with the song still in them. Henry David Thoreau. Can you
Beautiful.
talk a little bit about what that quote means to you?
Yeah. Well, it means an awful lot to me from a perspective of men's work in my own personal life. I think that at a young age, for a bunch of circumstances, because of various circumstances, I realized that I didn't quite fit into what a measure of success might be, according to the traditional world. And without really knowing, and because of a lot of paths of synchronicity, I followed my own way. I wouldn't say it was easy, but I know now at age 54 that I found that song and I'm singing it. And it's there's great gratitude to be living that sort of life. And it wouldn't have happened without even sort of Thoreau's path and the path for me through wilderness and nature. So I'll start there. And I'm sure you understand, you and I have been on a few adventures together. So
Beautiful, beautiful. And, you had talked about why every man needs a mythic storyline. Can you talk a little bit about why that's so important to you?
yeah, and that comes from a lot of directions. So, we live in a world that in many ways is defined by society. And for me personally, there's a limit and on some level a surface walking through life with just that path. And I've had experiences over and over, and I suppose many of us do, but that have dropped me underneath that surface. Dreaming, of course, is one of them. And so I started realizing that in order to be a man, there has to be some deep seated sort of epic story underneath, an old story. And that, regardless if we wish that or not, it's going on. And you can see it in everyone's dream world, which ties to mythologies and the oldest stories in the world. And so, this idea that we're being carried along underneath the surface by this deep story that's also greater than us, but sort of carrying us like a river, has given me impetus and capacity and power and imagination and life in life. So I hope that answers a little bit of that question, but that's much of what I try and bring to the table with men in particular.
Thank you. And what happens when people stop listening to their dreams? You talk
Oh,
about the longest distance between the head and the heart.
yeah. So on one level, dreams are beyond logic, beyond our daily mind, beyond our ego. And when we fall asleep, we seem to be cast into other realms, so to speak. And they're weird, believe me. No one quite understands what dreams are about. I've never heard someone say, "Hey, man, I had a normal dream last night," right? It's always something outrageous, bizarre, weird, and ununderstandable. But there's a language down there, right? Like this a mythological, a symbolic, a deep language. And when you start learning that language, it brings what we call mythos, sort of the other side of logos or logic, this deeper intuitional, instinctual, emotional, even unconscious or subconscious emerging consciousness sort of aspect of us to the table. And that world under there, to me, makes us sort of a whole or a more full person. And I sort of lost track of your question. So tell me if I answered it. Yeah.
Yeah, you had talked about the true battle is in the heart of man, and the longest distance is the distance between your head and your heart. So, if you're not listening to your dreams, if you're not paying attention, and you're just kind of showing up, you know, you start to not dream anymore, and then um, that could lead to a life of regret.
Exactly. Yeah. And we're not even talking about literal dreams. We're talking about the imagination of a man and the daydreams we have and the things we set aside in order to comply to the responsibilities of society. And, and to me, imagination isn't so something we can necessarily think of, which I think ties into your piece about the heart, right? And that is the battle in there. How do we
Mhm.
feel our way into the world from a warrior's perspective without relying solely on our logic, which is only one edge of the double blade, right? That we carry, the sword of truth and illusion. One side is logic, the other side is mythos or mystery or imagination.
Mhm. And you weren't always into dreams. You started out very early on as a geologist, a surveyor, a mapper, and it was from that experience that you were understanding the landscapes of nature, and that's kind of when you explored depth psychology and um, rites of passage at that point.
Yeah, and that's a really interesting story. I mean, yeah, I started out like I suppose many men with a sort of traditional career as a geologist, mapper, surveyor, working in Nevada and Montana, and really being out on the land because that's what I loved. And it was pretty traditional. And the reason I did it was I was so I loved the explorers sort of myth, and I loved being paid to see the world, so to speak, see the land. But then over time, what I realized that this industry of surveying and mapping at the same time was a way of cutting up the land and right subdivisions. You think of normal development and so on. And so there was some part of me that also understood that I may be damaging the very thing I loved. And so I had quite a difficult internal battle and falling out with what's my ethic here, right? And that was a long story and not an easy story. And within that, I came across this idea of depth psychology or sort of deeper psychology, the frontiers of psychology. And only in hindsight now I realized that what I was drawn towards was the inner landscapes, right? The inner wilderness. And that career of mapping and surveying, I simply translated to um, the inner psyche or the inner, the spirit world, soul world of a human. And that's sort of what I've been mapping and what I guide and help with now, if that makes sense. So,
Mhm. You talk a lot about the raven. What's the significance of the raven, and is that particular to you as a spirit animal, the raven?
I mean, Yeah, I'll first say that it came to me as a dream in my formative years when I was 21, maybe. The the bird actually swept down in a dream and hit me right here, and I woke up. It was a nightmare, actually, terrified that this unknown bird had done that. And at first, before I knew what to do, I was living in Montana. I actually studied ravens for real and followed them out where I could because it's raven country up there. And I loved these birds. They're so playful. They're so um, cunning and creative. They're scavengers. They're sort of outlaws in a way, and raucous, and then um, they're just really fun to watch. And as I started studying mythology and understanding, I realized that they also, on a deeper archetypal level, were messengers, from the underworld to above, as well as you think of Odin in Norse mythology, and he has two ravens that sit on his shoulders, thought and memory, and so they scout and they see the deep of the world and then bring those messages back. And in many mythologies, they've stolen fire from the sun, from the gods, to bring to humanity. And I just loved all these stories. And over time, I could never live up to a raven, but I feel that it's definitely an ally for me. And when I get too serious, they're sitting there playfully making fun of the world too, and themselves. And so um, they keep me honest, they keep me humble, and they cause the right kind of trouble.
Beautiful. You talk about nightmares are unforgettable on purpose. And this raven was a nightmare initially. And then from that, you transmuted it into daring to dream.
Right.
And just, it's beautiful how it kind of manifested into a career for you.
It is. I feel really lucky. And I think for those people that dream out there, we want to turn away from nightmares because they put fear into us. But that's actually, dreams are a language of wild nature, and nature out there is both cruel and kind, and it speaks from a different ethic than human ethics. So a lot of times the stories, the crazy things that happen in dreams are outside a human ethic, but it's only according to the dream, it's just a language that's older than words. So it speaks in a way that we will remember, right? And so a nightmare actually wants to be remembered. It's not there to harm us, but to get our attention. So it's really important when you have nightmares to find some support and turn towards the fear of the nightmare and see what's actually being asked or shown of you. And fortunately, I had mentors back then, even with the Raven dream, so I knew somewhere what to do with it, not to run away from it.
Beautiful. Thank you. So in respect of the hero's journey, there's 12 steps of the hero's journey, and I know we all have multiple hero's journeys. So with dreams, what would you say was your biggest challenge in dreams, and how did you kind of evolve from that to bring your elixir back to the people to share your medicine with that?
Yeah, great question. So I think the hardest thing with dreams is they are dismissed, they're overlooked, even by modern science. Um, they may not even be a manly pursuit, so to speak, right? Uh, and why are they important? Oh, you're just a dreamer. You think of all those things. It was just a dream. So I think the hero's journey in that was realizing from my own perspective, my own experience, that dreams had given me my life, right? Literally. And if I wasn't able to express the truth of that into the world, then I actually wasn't being true to the dream itself. So, the struggle or the hero's journey, I mean, I could probably identify all 12 phases in that, right? From running from that call, from, having allies, from being deep in the underworld with it and overwhelmed by dreams, from, recrossing the threshold and coming back to a place where it wasn't accepted to me continually speaking um, that truth to the world until consistency and persistence and my passion have made it real. And so here I am.
Love it. And you always talk about remembering your dreams. And I think a lot of people forget their dreams. So can you kind of advise the audience on how to set up a sanctuary for setting that up at night for, setting the atmosphere to dream?
Definitely. So intention goes a long way, and tangible intention, meaning get yourself a dream journal and a pen and maybe a headlamp, even with a red light, and put it beside your bed. Before you go to sleep, open that notebook and write the date, the whatever that night is, and write dreams, dot, dot, right? And then when you go to sleep, it's important to also um, you can ask for a dream before, as you fall asleep. Remember your dreams tonight, or I'd like to have a dream. I usually say, remember your dreams, Matt. Remember your dreams, Matt, 3 times. Just something like a little mantra, right? And the idea is you're creating a relationship with a presence, with this unknown thing we call the dream, right? There's something very alive and sentient about it. And so it's like maybe a small prayer or something, or to some unknown live force out there as we go to sleep. And if you open the door that way, then you're allowing it a chance to walk through, right? So as you sleep, you dream. That's common. It's not that we don't dream; it's that we just have a hard time remembering our dreams because they're fleeting and evasive. So when you wake up in the morning, before you jump up and think of all the to-dos in your day world, which is hard for fathers and people going to work and all that sort of stuff, right? Just lie there for a sec, uh, like like a wildcat. Before it moves, it takes in the environment around it and it listens. Just slowly, just for a minute, and see what comes back to you. You might turn into the position you were sleeping in. If you were fetal position, right side, memories are stored in the body. So a lot of times going back to the position you were sleeping in helps a dream come back. The more you practice these things, the easier it becomes. So that's what I'll leave for advice at the moment. Yeah.
Hmm. What's the importance of daydreaming?
I think imagination is one of the best skills we have as humans. Um, we're great critical thinkers, but at the same time, just think of all the narratives you make up without trying in your mind, good and bad, right? We have this natural
Mm-hmm.
capacity for story making, and so a daydream is a way of playing in this field in a more conscious and maybe skillful way. And so what we can imagine, we can then do, right? And so I
Mm-hmm.
really believe that it loosens the grip on sort of a civilized narrative on what we should be doing, right? Allow your imagination to be wild, allow it to go outside ethics. This is just a praxis, right? Allow it to live and
Mm-hmm.
see what it brings to the table, to perhaps the round table, and bring it in to a full council of your being in order to give you spark and life towards decisions that you make and directions that you decide to go.
Beautiful. Paolo Coelho, the author of The Alchemist, talks about there is only one thing that makes a dream impossible to achieve, and that's the fear of failure. So, just kind of in the ordinary world with people, they give up on their dreams. Can you talk about how much of a impact that is in our society today?
Yeah, I mean, fear is a tough one. I think, as you well know, it's like even myself, which we might talk about in a bit, living here, everything I've learned has come from mostly my failures in trying to live close to the land, right? And that's where I've gained capacity. But you said it's the fear of failure that stops us. So I'm going to hit on the fear, right? And so yeah, I always think of Michael Mead's story of called "Run Towards the Roar" about a pride of lions, and so they're going down to hunt all the young lions, and they decide to bring the one old lion whose teeth are worn down to nubs, and he's pretty immovable, but he goes with the young lions, and they go to the tall grasslands, and down the center of the grass is a path, and that's where all the gazelle and antelope come up. All the young lions lie in the tall grasses on one side of the trail, and they send the old guy to the other side of the trail. Now, as the gazelle and the antelope come up that path, what does the old lion do, or what can he do? Well, he can roar prodigiously. And that is exactly what he does. He roars as loud as he can, right? And it scares the hell out of all the antelope and the gazelle. And of course, they jump straight onto the opposite side of the trail, the opposite side of the roar, into the teeth and claws of the young lions and get shredded. And so the whole idea here, and this is an initiation story, is and how we train the young men is you need to turn towards the roar. You need to run towards the roar because actually that's the only way through. And so it's more about, and I don't know, in modern society, it seems for a lot of reasons that we are captured by our fear. And but fear is sort of an unconscious skill, right? It's something that keeps a deer alive and so on. And so we need to entertain it. We need to be counterintuitive with it. We need to face it, and we need to move through it rather than run from it. So that's that's why I think we lose our dreams. That fear.
I love that. I love that so much. A knight in shining armor is a man who has never had his mettle truly tested.
Yeah, I love
I
that
look
quote.
at that as a nice guy, right? The nice guy, the uninitiated man. Okay, and that kind of leads me to our next piece here, which is rites of passage. Initiated man. What is an initiated man? I believe you've done multiple rites of passage. Your first one back with Bill Plotkin, perhaps in back in your Animus days,
Yeah,
Animus Valley. Um, can you talk about what a rite of passage is to you?
sure. So a rite of passage for me is a way to ceremonial, ritually enact a great change in my life, whether it's from becoming a, a boy to a man, which is sort of a traditional way of going, whether it's just moving from one phase of life to another. It might even be a mystery, but you might feel this calling to change, to transform. And so a rite of passage in many ways, it's not only that ritual and ceremony, but it's about putting yourself out in a place outside of society where you're witnessed by the other than human world, which understands these radical and deep transformations. And I believe my own experience is that I was not a whole man until I understood that the more than human community was witnessing, carrying me, supporting me, teaching me, showing me a way. And so, yeah, a rite of passage is just as its title goes. It's a inward and outward journey at the same time from one terrain to the next.
Love it. And there's a deep connection with nature there because you're by yourself for 4 days and 4 nights with no food, just water in whatever area you're in the world. And what's the importance of nature in
Yeah,
in the rite of passage?
great. Yeah, and a couple things there. So, yeah, it is important to say that a traditional rite of passage, you're not eating, and you're exposed and you're out there for 4 days. It's in a way the sacrifice, the thing that makes your rite of passage sacred, to give something up in order to sip and taste the spirit world, so to speak, right? Which feeds you in a different way. Um, so, nature, like dreams, it reflects things that humans can't, right? In many ways. The great forces of nature are also inside of us. The rivers that run our veins, we start seeing ourselves in the great drama that exists out in the wilderness and nature. And when that happens, um, something is identified inside of us, something is witnessed, and something wakes up beyond just what maybe a human teacher, could reflect back. And everyone has their own personal story and their own unique experience with that. So I can't name it for other people, but for me, I felt like I came fully home when I was out there and in the wilderness in these things. And I was seen in a way that I can never be seen in other parts of my life, and validated.
Mm. Yeah, and I keep going back to fear. Like, what would happen if you put down your phone, if you turned off the television, if you were just with yourself for those 4 days? Some people are petrified of being alone with their own thoughts, and it's a misconception because on the other side of fear, there's just everything for you. Out of that comfort zone is just faith and so much more medicine for you to take in. And I think more people should be doing this in modern society. So how do you think modern society can benefit from this indigenous Native American practice?
Yeah. And, I think that, well, I mean, it's been known for a long time now that we've lost rites of passage. If you look back into history, not only indigenous and native cultures, but ancient cultures, every culture across the board had some sort of rite of passage, whether it was for men, for women, for whether it's a marriage. There's so many different ways to enact this ceremony, and there have been. And for some reason in the modern world, and the speed at which we're moving and so on, and sort of the breakup of community and family in and the globalization of stuff has eroded this old tradition that's older than sin, as they say, right? That's and that in its own way is a cycle of nature itself. As a just imagine a tree, it puts out leaves, the leaves fall. We the seasons, we this is what a rite of passage is enacting something that's all around us. And so, a society that doesn't have rites of passage, doesn't have initiated adults, doesn't have initiated leaders, which means we are, it's sort of like Lord of the Flies being led by children, right? And so, how do you know the difference between an elder, a true elder, and someone who's just older, right? How do you know the difference between a boy and a man, right? So initiation is this mark both personally and from the community that marks us into something else and is witnessed. And I think the more we would be, the more, if we introduced rites of passage back into our culture, um, it would teach us a lot of what we have forgotten.
Mm, love it. I think about the wilderness and rewilding in urban landscapes with us in front of our computer and not acting in accordance like our ancestors, and you being at the forefront of wilderness and teaching how to make a fire, teaching how to make a shelter, teaching how to, carve a knife. Can you talk more about the importance of rewilding and the wilderness experience for young and old?
Yeah. So I think, well, first off, some context. I live on a piece of land that's surrounded by federal land on all sides. Um, I mean, it's a tiny town of 200 or 300 in southern Utah. And then we have a 2 million acre national monument. We have Forest Service. We have BLM lands. So I'm literally like absolutely surrounded by um, wilderness, and the closest town to me is 28 miles away. So, we have a hybrid life out here. My partner Constance and I, we live a bit off grid, not completely, but we've found the right balance. So every day now for 16 years, I can walk off my property into wilderness, right? Or I'm in the heart of it. And, to answer your question, I think that learning, well, first of all, like I've said, we're outside the scope of society's day to day business. I forget what day of the week it is out here because the lifestyle I live, which is certainly hard work, weekends don't really come into play, and what you're looking at out here in order to grow your own food and so on is the weather, right? And so already my first daily sort of intimacy is not with a schedule, not with a preconceived idea of what the structure of a day looks like, but I'm attuning to what needs to be done in the moment, what's the priority, and who leads that priority. Nature does, right? In many ways.
Mm-hmm.
And um, so, one thing that wilderness teaches is capacity and how to adapt, how to change, how to do what you think can't be done, how to prioritize on a different level, and how to be self reliant on many levels. And a lot of times, self reliance actually means you recognize you can't do it alone. You need the help of the community. You need the help of a team of people. And so, in a small community like we live in, it's not like we grow all our own food. We trade, we work with people around here. We wouldn't survive without other people, um, you know, raising cattle, grass fed here, or growing grain over there. We can do, vegetables and so on and fruit trees, but we can't cover it all. So um, there's a real sort of unwritten teamwork and generosity that goes around in a small community like this when our closest neighbor is wilderness, right?
I
So
love it.
that's a little bit. That's a little bit. Yeah.
The name of my show is After the Peaks, and my last guest actually climbed Mount Everest, but everyone has their own peaks that they climb. And for you, I really feel like you've detached from the belief that we need to just work as hard as we can on the hamster wheel and make as much money as possible, get the big house, get the family and the kids and the picket fence. Like, you've really detached from that, and you told me, if it doesn't make your soul sing, then why are you doing it? Right? So to me, you're living the full embodiment of what you're talking about. Like, you're walking the talk. But I know there's been a lot of challenges, and Nelson Mandela, it always seems possible until it's done. You didn't build your house overnight, right? I know there's been challenges with living a lifestyle of sustainability. So, can you talk about the challenges of really leaning into a life of sustainability, fully detached from what's expected of you from society?
Certainly. And so great question. uh, yeah, I could probably go on for hours about this part. um, Context is I grew up an urban kid. I grew up in San Francisco and was raised in the Bay Area. So I came from the place that many of us come from, right? And then in my late teens, 20s, I just, I chose to go another way. And at that point, this is just context, right? At that point, um, it was escapism purely because I didn't feel at home, in a lot of it. And I was shy and I was sort of passive. And so my go to was just escape out to wilderness. So I wouldn't say I was responsible at all. It took until my 30s to sort of wake up to the full thing, right? And then over time and lots of stories, I met my partner Constance in my late 30s, and we got this land out here, and a big ideal, a big dream. And then when you get out here, it's like, oh shit, this is no easy task. And to grow your own food, I figured it'd take me about 3 years to build a house completely by hand myself, straw bale, earth plasters, recycled wood. It took me 8 years. Uh, and we were up against, because we were building alternatively, we were up against the system, permitting, engineering, liability, all these things that don't quite feed into this lifestyle. We had to negotiate this stuff because people didn't trust what we were doing, that it was somehow safe, or it was sort of outside the box. Um, Out here, the difficulty of finding resources was really hard, right? And then financial is one of the biggest pieces that I think we all wrestle with. I, was lucky in many ways that in order to do this project, being in debt would not have worked. And I was able to pay for the land down outright. And then I didn't have to worry about a monthly, thing. So I think one sustainability to me, when I think of it on a lot of levels, one of the big hurdles is you, you have to get out of debt. You have to do certain things to sort of create neutral ground to create the lifestyle to make it work in such a way. Otherwise, you're always going to be butting heads and at conflict with things. Um, so the challenges of living so remotely is loneliness, right? There's not much culture out here. I can't just go out, sit at a cafe, and meet people, um, which works somewhat to my benefit. But I also realize, and now that uh, a group of people really helps to expand my ideas and help me move forward. And so, you know, wrestling with isolation is a big part of the picture out here too. And how do you keep connected when you're living on the edge of things? So these are some of the hurdles. The other hurdles, would be, uh, I think you talked about it, like my sense of value is different. Like I'm not looking to make money, but I also, because I live on so little, it's not like I can just take off and go fly across the world and go see things because I desire to. I've had to give up in some ways a lot of that easy wishful thinking, and I don't really miss it, but it, the diversity and maybe the opportunities of being in this fast-paced and exciting world, and in all its manifestations is I've sort of staked my ground. I'm here, so some days I feel in the middle of the wilderness, I feel very domestic and trapped. um, and then other days I'm like, no, that's crazy. You're free and you're wild. And so uh, those are a few of the hurdles. I'm sure there are many more, but hopefully that answers some of your questions. Yeah.
Yeah. And how many people are in your community?
Winter it's a little quieter because everything shuts down, the businesses and so on. So we're about 250 in the winter and about 350 in the summer. So it's like living in a huge
And you had talked that, yeah, yeah. And you talked about you're part of a council in your community. So there's groups that do meet and you guys talk about initiatives in the community and embracing that particular lifestyle.
Yeah, I run a men's council and have been for about 5 or 6 years. There are 14 of us now, and yeah, all sorts of ideas come up. And it's obviously it's a men's council, so there are particular topics. Constance in the past, my partner, has run a women's
Mm-hmm.
council, and we try and bring these ideas. The great thing about living in a small community, whether you're not anonymous, but whatever you say, good or bad, actually you can see the impact of it a lot more quickly than you can in a much larger anonymous town that you might live in, right? You have impact. Like I said, that's for better or for worse. So you
Mm-hmm.
have to be real careful how you handle yourself. Um, so yeah, those councils. I've also spent 5 years working on the planning commission, which deals with, the future planning and guardianship in a way of the town itself. And that is tricky territory, politics within a small town where everyone knows each other, differing views and opinions, how a place should grow, how to retain the character, especially during the pandemic boom and the Zoom boom when everyone wants a piece out here and wants to do whatever the hell they want, right? And so you don't sell out your town.
Mm-hmm.
You don't make it a second home ownership piece of land, right? How do you create a how do you allow a small town
Mm-hmm.
that cares about its future, and how do you attract the young people that want to be here full time, right? Because full time is the commitment it takes. And how do you don't want to turn into a resort town, or at least I don't, right, at this point. So because it loses
Mm-hmm.
something central to it and in its relationship to the wilderness around it, it becomes recreation rather than something maybe more deeper and honest in living. So yeah.
Beautiful. I want to talk briefly about men's work. You're in men's work, and I've been in men's work for about, I think this is the third year. And before the pandemic, I had no idea what it was. And you've been in that space for a long time, and I feel like there's almost like a revolution of people who are waking up to be a part of men's organizations. Can you talk about what your experience in men's work is and why it's so important to younger, older, everyone?
Yeah, as I've hinted at in my story, I was an isolated man growing up, a lone wolf. I thought I could do it all myself, but I felt very much an outsider, and I went through, periods of depression and obviously always doubt and uncertainty. Given my lifestyle, it just didn't fit in, right? And so I'm not who I, you know, who I am today is not who I was back then. And it took me until my 40s really to understand that. And hard times, like really breaking down, like nothing's working anymore and I can't. It forced me to face certain fears, which were re-entering, quote, society, finding people, trusting people. And men's work was a big part of that. And ever since I started men's work, I realized um, that my life would have just plateaued, and having men that I can trust, who witness me, who call me on my own bullshit, who are willing to challenge me and hold me to my own accountability, has given me a lot more capacity to become more than I thought I could be. And, it's provided me skills in leadership. And, I never would have been on the planning commission or run the planning commission here without that sort of experience. So, in the end, for the young men out there, find a brotherhood, find a team of men you can trust. It's so worthwhile because you're only going to go so far on your own. And it's going to be a vast, echoless pit of isolation if you just keep to yourself. That's where that sort of hidden pain and silent frustration live. And as soon as you can start getting that stuff off your chest, which you can with other men, then it starts freeing you up from, in my mind, the entrapments of society and allows you to step more fully into yourself and to follow purely your own authenticity. No one else has that idea of what you are, but once you have witnesses and brotherhood, then you can find it for yourself much more easily. That's men's work for me.
Yeah, I think, yeah, I think there's just such a stigma around asking for support, asking for help. In this bracelet I'm wearing, Mission 22, it's every day 22 vets commit suicide, and that could be prevented, right? And it's like we don't ask for help, we don't ask for support, we go at it alone as a lone wolf. And for myself personally, I've learned so much just being in this space in the short amount of time I've been, and it's just kind of uncovering so much in me that I knew I thought it was there, but now I know it's there, right? Because I am
Yeah,
being witnessed, I am being acknowledged.
yeah. It's like sort of the
So,
validation of your core, actually, because it's so easy for us to erode our own sense of identity because of self criticism or judgment or just unskilled thinking, right? And so, uh, yeah, we need we need brotherhood. So,
mhm. What's one actionable step the audience can take to make the world a better place?
mm. Kindness, and I'll say just following men's work. If there's a man in your life and come on, when a man's suffering, right? And they're probably not saying it. You might just like actually really sit down, put a hand on his shoulder and say, "Hey man, what's going on? Really? I'm here for you." That simple. And listen.
Beautiful. Hmm. Before we wrap up, Matt, could you let our listeners know where they can find you? Or are there any websites, social media handles, or other platforms where they can connect with you and learn more about your work?
Yeah, thanks, Quigley. Um, so I have a website, ravendreamtracking.org, and but most my content and the best way to really follow me is on Instagram. The handle there is Raven Dream Tracking as well. I put out a lot of content, both on dreams, on nature, on rites of passage, and so on. And so those are really the two main things I work from, and I'm always happy to hear from you, whatever your interest is in what I do. And thanks. Yeah.
Great, Matt. Well, thanks for joining us. And that brings us to the end of our third episode of After the Peaks. I want to extend a heartfelt thank you to our incredible guest, Matt Cochran, for sharing his valuable insights and experiences with us today. Until next time, keep spreading positivity, making a difference, and embracing the extraordinary in your own lives. Take care, and we'll catch you on the next episode of After the Peaks.
Thanks, Brian. An honor.